Welcome to Just Wanna Quilt, a research podcast coming out of Tulane University Law School, where we explore all kinds of things, stories about quilting, tools, field trips, maybe some famous quilters stop by, and, of course, a little bit of copyright thrown in just for fun. I'm Dr. Elizabeth Townsend-Gard. I'm a law professor, and I just want to quilt. Today we're talking to Jill Repp. She is with June Tailor. We know June Tailor from the basting sprays and the cutting mats and the rulers, and we talked to her about all those things and more. You are my 49th interview in like the space of 4 weeks. It's remarkable. We've had, so we've kind of gotten it down, but everyone is different. So what this project is trying to do is really understand the landscape of the quilting industry, from the person who just has their grandmother's quilts to industry people to distributors to you guys. So and I think it's going to be a 2-year project, and we're going to try to get to at least 200 interviews in that time span, so I can then do lots of academic work on it and do a kind of general book for people about intellectual property and social norms in the quilting industry. So that's that's the fancy part of it. The why you're here part of it is I'm really curious about your story and about June Tailor as a company, and then I have a whole bunch of questions. So you can answer any questions you want, and you can be like, well, I'm not really interested in that question. It's not hard-hitting journalism in any way. And then also, if you find that there is a question you're willing to answer, but you do not want it public, you just let me know either then or after the interview, and I can cut it out. So if you
sounds great.
And we start with the same question every time, and it's just fun. It usually is a half an hour to 45 minutes, sometimes an hour, depending on how people chat. And then if for some reason we really hit it off, and we find that there's just more that we want to talk about, we can always do a part 2. So we've had that a couple times where we get to about 45 minutes in, and it's like, well, we've only got to the first topic, so let's just chat some more. I envision this as, and then I'm almost done with my spiel. I envision this. I'm really making this podcast for me, which is I love to quilt at night and on the weekends, and I want something that I can just listen to that are stories, and that I learn a little bit more about quilting and how other people feel about quilting. So that's kind of we're going to start. They'll be live starting in not live, but they'll be broadcast starting in mid-January, which is totally scary because it's like 2 weeks from now. So that's the whole thing. Any questions with that?
No, sounds great.
Okay, cool. Awesome. All right, so let me get the recording started. Okay. So we're going to start with tell me who you are and where you are at the moment.
Okay, my name is Jill Repp, and I have been with June Tailor 24 years.
Wow.
I joined the company shortly after June passed away. The company is 57 years old. And can I tell you a little bit about how June got started? And
Totally.
Then kind of where I came in the process?
Yeah, let me ask you our first quick question, which is, what's your, and then we'll get back to it because I want to hear everything about this. But just so that we have a sort of basic, everybody's been asked this question, is what's your first memory of someone quilting or sewing in your life?
Oh, my grandmother.
Yeah.
I have 4 older sisters, and my grandmother taught us all how to sew and quilt. And we all had a beautiful quilt from her that she made when we were born, one when we graduated high school, one when we got married.
Oh, that's so cool. That's so cool. And did you? That's really cool. Do you? Obviously, you still have them. I'd love to see them if you have photos of them. That's really cool. And did she sew them by hand or machine? What do they look like?
Well, for my older sisters, they were all hand-pieced quilts and all hand-done. And then when I came along, she had a Singer treadle sewing machine. You know what I'm talking about,
Yeah.
where the foot pedal was a kind of a treadle.
Yeah.
And she thought that was the greatest thing, and that's how we all learned to sew, on that treadle machine.
That is so cool. I haven't ever experienced one of those. I really want to. That's really interesting. And then Did you did you sew or quilt? Did you take it? Did you get the?
Well, I grew up sewing. Like I said, there were 5 girls in my family, and if we wanted anything, that was how we were able to get it, was to sew. My mother was a seamstress, but she didn't really sew out of love. She sewed out of necessity. My grandmother is the one who taught us all how to sew and quilt, and she was the one who went step by step.
That's really interesting.
Are you still there, Elizabeth?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yeah, there was some beeping in there. I didn't know if I lost you or not. And so she always had these rules that you had to start what you finished, had to look as good on the inside as it did on the outside, if you were sewing a garment, for example. And you had to wear it at least 3 times before you would get to go with her and get new fabric. So she initially taught us all garment construction, which back in the 60s was what we did. And then later on, she taught us what her philosophy was on the basics of quilt making. Scale, color, how to mix and match patterns and styles.
That's really cool. I like that. I like those philosophies a lot. That's great. You have to start what you
and
finish.
You know what? I'm an old now. I can make my decision whether or not I want to give up on a project, but I can't do it because I have that instilled in me that I have to finish what I start.
I like that. That's one of my New Year's resolutions, is to finish what I've started here with all the projects. No new projects till they're all completed. So I like that. There's something about it's important. I think that really is an important step of it, because you feel like, I don't know, I feel a little bit like I've failed when I haven't finished a project. So that's not a really good
always
feeling.
new fabrics and new patterns. And so you see, oh, I want this, I want that. And you kind of forget how beautiful the thing is that you are already making.
It's true. And I don't know about you, but I always get to this part in a project where I think it's just beyond awful, and that it's awful. And that if I just push through it, it actually turns out to be quite lovely. But there is a moment of like, it's not the new shiny thing anymore. And I don't think I've done a very good job. And there's just a lot of self-doubt. So you got to push through it. At least I do. So awesome. Okay. So that's really helpful. That's really cool to know. So tell us then, you joined 24 years ago. Tell us how you got to this company, and tell us a little bit more about the June Tailor Company.
Okay. So my background is in pulp and paper science.
Okay. What is that?
It is not in...
Yeah. So what is pulp and paper science?
I spent 10 years calling on pulp and paper mills, actually many in your part of the country. And I sold products to them that helped mulch wood chips into pulp to make paper. But I always loved sewing. And when my husband and I were thinking about having a family, we recognized that I couldn't be traveling all over the country and do that. And at the same time, a friend of mine said, had I heard that June Tailor was looking for someone to run their sales department. And this is in the days where an ad was in the paper. The internet really wasn't something to be reckoned with. And so I applied for the sales position at June Tailor, and I ended up meeting June's husband and son-in-law. And as it turned out, June had founded this company in 1960, and in July of 1993, she was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And she pretty much stepped away at that time, and the company just ran until she passed away in November of 93. And I started in January of 94.
Wow.
This is a very small company, a company that really, a lot of our products were made by cottage industries. We only served independent quilt shops and independent sewing stores and a few distributors. It was a very small operation. And June's husband was involved, and her son-in-law was president of a big steel corporation in the area, and he was the one who interviewed me. So we all came to a conclusion that I loved selling things, and I knew something about sewing. Didn't understand the retail business, but I could be taught that by June's husband. And so that's how it all got started. I knew I had big shoes to fill because June was a very creative person, and she had developed some amazing products for quilting, all based off her philosophy of garment sewing. So June actually started out with tailoring products, pressing products mainly that were used in the tailoring sewing world. And she did very well with those products, but realized that in the 70s and the 80s that so many women were not sewing clothes anymore because they were working, they had less time, and stores like Marshall's and TJ Maxx popped up. So they were discounters offering designer clothes at a discount, and women just sewed for themselves and their families less and less. So she took all of her talents and all of her skills in the garment sewing area and transitioned those skills into her products for the quilting industry. And so where she really made headway was how to press a quilt as you construct it using pressing techniques from the garment sewing business. And so the first thing I did when I started working here is I had to laugh because her very first product was something called a tailor board used for tailoring, hard tailoring, like darts and puffed sleeves and more difficult angles. And I actually sewed with that. My grandmother had that tool, and I learned how to press using a tailor board. So the first thing I did when I got here is I read June's tips and techniques for pressing, and I learned a lot about how these tips really apply to cotton quilting fabrics and how there are many different types of cotton and which way to press the seam and to press without steam if you want to be able to shift some things around, and then press with steam when you want to actually secure everything in place. And so I tried to become an expert on pressing so that I could carry on with her product development. And so the first year was definitely a big learning experience for me.
That's really cool. And so so now you've got like 100 let's go back for just a second because I have like 1,000 questions. So with that, with the tailor board, how was she protecting that, or sort of, did people know about it? Was it about sort of like, well, you want her board, like because she invented it, sort of, what was sort of behind the scenes on that? Does that make sense? Like either the intellectual property.
I will tell you it was actually the Christmas of 1960. She was making a red wool vest for her husband, and she could not get it pressed properly. So he was kind of a handyman in his basement, made her this tailor board using her ideas of what it should look like. The product was then patented, and it was sold in stores in the Wisconsin area. It was sold at State Fair. It was sold in the back of McCall's magazine. I don't know if you remember the old McCall's magazine.
Yeah.
And the patent was interesting enough that she was courted by the company Prim Dritz, who obviously you know, the signature red pin cushion company.
Uh-huh.
And for about 5 years, she licensed the tailor board to Dritz, and they took it to market. And she thought they might be able to take it to market in a bigger way, and they did, but they also wanted to change the quality of the product a little bit. So after 5 years, she took it back, and there were no more licensing agreements made. And she remarketed it again on her own and added a bunch of pressing cloths to it and other types of complementary products for pressing.
That's really interesting. And
yes.
Now I imagine I know the patent has expired on it because it was a while back. And do you see a bunch of people that now make this? Is this a standard in the industry now that the patent is expired, or did she do a improvement patent on it? What does it look like? I mean,
the product basically now is we still make it, and we sell it exclusively to Nancy's Notions. And we, Fran, her son-in-law, who is now the president and CEO of our company, has found a way